everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Charlene, and today I'm going to be talking about all of my goals for 2025. So kind of like last year, I don't have a ton of goals as far as number of goals themselves. However, as far as number of books, that might be a little bit different story. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what I want my goals to be for next year, mostly by looking back on this year and just seeing what have I done well and what have I not done well, and how do I think I can fix that. And I know a lot of people talk about having a word for the year. I've never really done that, but this year I did have several words in mind that I felt like encompassed kind of the direction I wanted things to go, some of the changes I wanted to make, and I made an entire background for my computer that had those words on there so that way I could see them throughout the year. The main idea I had for this last year was slow down, take things in moderation, and Hugo was another big word. Just focus more on the calm, the cozy, things like that. I didn't do horrible with this, but as I was looking back on the year, mostly back in November, I realized I didn't do a very good job of this when it came to the warmer months. I did pretty well in the cooler months, but not the warmer ones. And I think part of the reason is because, just if you really think about it, the seasons are different and they require different things of us. So there's not as much slow down, focus on the cozy things in the summer months as there are in the winter months, because there's a lot more going on. The weather is warmer. There's more events going on. There's more things to do. I know for us, there's more to do in the house, in the yard. We have a garden, all sorts of different things going on that just keep you busy. And so I realized as I'm looking towards next year that focusing on the cozy, the slow is not going to work for every season. It works well for the fall and the winter. It doesn't work as well for the spring and summer. So going into next year, I do have a word that's come to mind that I feel like encompasses the general idea of what I'm going for. Hugo was more of the word for last year, with some other words that also helped encompass everything I had in mind. Because when I was making plans for this year, one of the things I was noticing about myself was that I tend to be at 0 or 60, and there's no in between. So there will be times that I'm sitting down, relaxing, maybe I'm reading, maybe I'm playing a game on the computer, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have all these things I need to get done, and I hop up out of that chair, and then I spend the next 2 to 3 hours doing a whole ton of work, pretty much without stopping. That was why I had moderation as one of my words, because I'm like, I need to have a more medium pace where I am steadily getting things done, but I'm not running myself ragged. Or having those times where I just sit and do nothing. I mean, yes, we need times to relax and do nothing, but it doesn't need to be a one or the other, an all or nothing. There needs to be some in the middle. And that part I do feel like I did better with this year. I've had more times where I've realized I don't have the energy to do all of this. And so instead of saying, well, I don't have the energy to do all of it, so I'm going to do none of it, which is more of what I would do in the past, I've gone to, I'll just get done what I can get done, and everything else will just have to wait. So it has been better this year in that regard. But the word that I have in mind for next year, and I guarantee there will be other words that come to mind that will also help encompass this idea, is balance. Because that's one thing I've noticed, especially since starting this channel, is I'm not the best when it comes to balancing things in my life. And if you saw my Q&A video, there was a question I got where I was asked, what does your perfect day look like? And I guarantee my perfect day did not look like anything like what somebody would have imagined it looking like. Because I basically said I want a day where I can get a fair amount of everything done that needs to be done. So getting things done around the house, getting some reading done, working on stuff for the channel, spending time with my kids, spending time with my husband, spending time in my Bible, and go to bed feeling like, yes, I got some of everything done and a reasonable amount of everything done that I can just go to bed and feel good about going to bed. Probably not what most people's perfect day would look like, but that's the struggle that I've been dealing with this year, is trying to balance out all of the different things I have going on. And I don't feel like I've always done the best job of that. So that's one of the things I really want to focus in on next year, is just having a better balance between the work that I need to do, the personal hobbies I want to work on, and my personal relationships. So that's feeding in quite a bit into my first goal for 2025. So my first goal is how many books I want to read. But this is going to look very different from what most people's reading goal looks like, because I'm not assigning a minimum number of books that I want to read. Now, granted, if you follow me on Goodreads, you will notice that my reading goal was 1 book for this year, and it's been that way for several years. The only reason I list a goal at all on Goodreads is because I want to be able to track my reading throughout the year. Or I want Goodreads to track my reading, I guess I should say. For the most part, my goal, my unofficial goal, is to read about as many books as I did the year prior. Normally, I stick somewhere in about the 75 to 90 book range every year. And so I generally want to fall somewhere in there. But I don't want a hard and fast number that starts stressing me out because I haven't reached it yet. But for next year, I'm doing it a little bit differently, because the number I have in mind is not a minimum number of books to read. It's a maximum number. And my maximum number is 60. Yes, I am hoping to read fewer books next year than I read this year. The reason why I'm doing this is because I have realized over the past several years, I've been keeping stats since 2016. I mentioned that in my 2024 goals recap. And in 2016, I read 45 books because I wasn't pushing myself. This was just what I normally read in an average year. And I've also noticed, as I count up the books every year that I read, that I typically read between 45 and 55 novels. And generally speaking, when I say novels, these are books over 200 pages. Books under 200 pages I consider to be novellas. So it's generally between 45 and 55 novels every single year. And that's been fairly consistent for a while, regardless of how many books I read a year. So if you see some years, like last year, I read 92 books. But if you were able to see my stats and look back a few years ago, I only read 75 books. My novels were still in that 45 to 55 range, which just means I was reading a lot of shorter books. So I was reading more poetry or more manga or graphic novels or something like that. But the reason why I'm making my goal 60, and that being kind of the cap, is 60 is all I want to read next year, is because I've noticed with reading so many more books a year, and to some people, it doesn't feel like a lot. There are a lot of booktubers who read well over 100 books a year. I can't do that. I've never been able to do that, even before I had kids. So I don't expect that to ever happen. If I ever hit 100 in a year, I would be shocked. But I've noticed that with reading so many more books, mostly since 2016, and especially since having this channel, I've noticed that I don't feel like I really have the time to immerse myself in a book, and then after I finish the book, really spend time reflecting on that book, because I'm just moving on to the next book. I'm finishing one book so I can get to the next one, so I can get to the next one. And I want to take more time to enjoy the books that I'm reading, to really spend time thinking about them and reflecting on them, because I'll be honest, when I was going to put together my list for my best books of 2024, of the books that were on the list, only probably 4, maybe 5 of them did I think of without having to look them up. Because there were so many books that I read that I finished them, immediately moved on to the next book, came back to them briefly to film a wrap-up video, and then moved on from them, that I just didn't remember them. And it's sad when they are books that I loved, but I don't think about them. And so I just want to spend more time in the books that I'm reading. And I'm also hoping that if I slow my reading down a bit and really let myself get more invested in the books, spend more time in them, that it'll be a lot easier for me to tell if this is a book I should DNF or not. Because there are times that I DNF a book because I'm like, okay, this is a slog. I want to push through it, but I can't get through it. But is it a problem with the book, or is it a problem because I'm wanting to push through all of these books and I can't push through this one very fast? So I just want to get to the next book and not worry about that one. And then how many books do I push through because they're really easy to get through? But if I was actually going slower with my reading and spending more time in it, I would realize, it really just isn't that good of a book to me, or it's not a book that's really working. So even though I'm getting through it quickly and easily, is it a book I really want to spend my time on? So I'm hoping to get a little bit more of a balance, if you will, with the books that I DNF. And also just be able to really spend some more time in the books that I'm reading and spend more time reflecting on them after I'm done with them. Now, this is going to make things difficult because I'm used to having a lot of books on my TBR every month that I really want to get to. Always more than I actually can get to. But for the most part, the way I think I'm going to make my TBRs every month is there will be, as far as I figured, 3 books that are my priority. I have to get to these books this month. Everything else is going to be, what can I get to and what do I want to get to? So the 3 books that I will need to get to are, number 1, my book club book. If you missed it, I did announce that I am starting a book club in January. I will have the announcement video linked down in the description below. But whatever book I have picked for that month, I need to get to that book. It's my book club. I better get to that book. The second book is whatever is chosen for my in real life book club with my brother and sister-in-law. We started this one about a year ago. It was November of 2023. And we take turns each month picking a book for all of us to read together. So whatever book gets picked, that book needs to be a priority for the month as well. And then the third book is I want to read 1 new release every month. I have done terrible at keeping up with new releases. I did read a few this year, although The Women, I will be honest, it came out in February and I read it in November. So I didn't do that good with that one. And there were at least a couple others that I read. But I have not done the best with keeping up with new releases. And I want to do a better job with that. So I will be trying to read 1 new release every month. And by new release, to give myself some restrictions here, is going to be a book that is released the month before the month I'm wanting to read it, in the month that I'm wanting to read it, or the month after. So say for instance, in January, if there's a book that I'm approved for that's coming out in February, I can read it in January and it still counts. Or I can read a book that's coming out in January, or I can read a book that was released in December. Any of those would count. But I just want to do better about keeping up with the new releases. And then there are some challenges that people are hosting here on BookTube that I also want to take part in. And they are on a monthly basis. The first one is the Classics Challenge, which is being hosted by Anne from In Search of Wonder. And honestly, I really like the idea of this challenge because I don't always do the best with keeping up with classic books. So I do want to do this challenge to try to read more classic books every month. Then the second challenge is Chantel's Read Your Bookshelf Challenge, which I've been doing this one, I think, every year since it started. If not every year, then at least since the second year. This year's is going to be a much easier challenge because it's just 1 word and you have to pick a book that fits that word. But again, they are divided by month. There are 12 different prompts. And then the last one is the Elevate Your Reading Challenge, which is hosted by Angie from Book Mama. With this one, she has both a prompt for every month and she has a group read. Now, I'm not planning to do the group reads myself, but I would at least like to try to do the challenges. And then on top of the challenges, there are several book clubs and read-alongs and things like that that happen on BookTube. Now, for all of the challenges and the book clubs and the read-alongs, outside of the 2 book clubs that I am very much involved in, all of those books that I would read for them are going to be optional for the month. If I get to them that month, great. If I don't, it's fine. When the next month rolls around, I move on. And that's one of the hard parts I have had in previous years is whenever I decide to do these challenges, I always feel like if I don't get a month done, then the next month I have to get 2 months done. That basically at some point I have to catch up and get the previous months finished. And that's one of the things I don't want to do next year. There's these 3 challenges that I want to do. If I don't get any of them done in January, then in February, I just move on. I focus on February. January's done. It's done and over with. I don't need to go back to it. I don't need to finish it. I can just move on to February. That's how I'm going to try to focus on this so that even if I do have a bigger TBR in a month, as far as the books that I would like to get to, if I don't get to them, then in the next month, I just start fresh. And unless I have a book in progress and I need to finish it, if the book isn't started, then I just move on. And if it works for a prompt in the next month, great, I can add it again. But I don't have to. Again, one of those things I'm trying to keep in mind with just mostly trying not to stress myself out or give myself any extra anxiety than is necessary. I want to enjoy my reading. I mean, don't we all? And I don't want the extra stress of I have to get to, say, 10, 15 books in a month to be hanging over my head every month. And if I don't get to them that month, then feeling like they have to roll over to the next month. That's the focus there. Now, I do have some other reading goals in mind for next year, but they're not centered around a specific month. The main thing I want to work on is getting through a lot of these series that I have in progress. That's been my goal for the last couple of years, and I have made progress, but every year I always end up starting several new series, and it always feels like an uphill battle. Now, there were a lot of series that I decided this year I wasn't worried about continuing. So my list went from about 58, 59 series in progress at the beginning of the year to, I think, 36 or 37. And I did start more series than I finished this year, so that's quite a few series that I just DNF'd. My goals as far as series are that, first of all, I want to finish or get caught up on every series that currently only has 1 book left. So this could be a series that is still ongoing, but there's only 1 more book out in the series that I haven't read. Or it could be a series that is completed, but I only have 1 book left. Because that is where I seem to get hung up, is reading the last book in a series. I don't know why. I've only finished, at the time of filming, 6 series this year. That's not very many when you consider how many I have going. So I want to focus on getting through all of these series that only have 1 book left on them, or getting caught up on the series that only have 1 more book out. So it's a little easier getting through these series that have multiple books left in hopefully future years. All right. So for that part, I will need to put the coffee down, which is fine because that mug gets heavy. You wouldn't think it, but when you hold that mug for about 20 minutes, it gets really heavy. Okay, so I don't own every book that I need to read for these series, nor do I own every series. But we're just going to kind of go through these, hopefully fairly quickly. I'm not going to go into what the books are about, but I will at least give you the age category and genre. So the first series that I need to get caught up on is The Raven vs. Crow trilogy by Amy L. Warden. At least I'm pretty sure this is going to be a trilogy. The 3rd book is not out yet. This is the 2nd book. This is Deviation. But I would like to get caught up on this series before the 3rd book comes out. And if the 3rd book comes out in 2025, then technically it means I have 2 books left. Because I am counting series that have a book coming out in 2025 with these. But as of right now, as far as I'm aware, this is the only book out, and I don't think there's been a release date given yet for the 3rd book. So I do need to read this one. But this is an adult fantasy that is indie published, and it does also have an older protagonist if you're interested in that. The next one is one that I need to finish, and that is Forward the Foundation by Isaac Asimov. And I grabbed the wrong book. I just realized. No, sorry. Prelude to Foundation is the name of the duology. Forward the Foundation is the book that I need to get to. This and Prelude to Foundation are the 2 prequels to the Foundation trilogy, and I've read Prelude to Foundation, bought this one earlier this year and I still haven't read it. So need to get this duology finished and then eventually work on the sequel duology or trilogy. I can't remember if there's 2 or 3 books after the original trilogy. And this is a classic adult sci-fi. All right, the next few are chunky books, but the next one that I need to get caught up on is the Cinder Spire series by Jim Butcher. This is The Olympian Affair, which is the second book. And as of this point in time, we do not have a release date for the third book. So no idea when that one's coming out. But I did reread The Aeronauts Windlass in 2024 so I could read this book with that one fresher in my mind. And then I didn't get to this one. So need to get to it next year. Also, when I say chunky book, it's 610 pages. Then the next one, this is a series I need to finish. I was hoping to finish this one by the end of the year, but I have a feeling at this point that's not going to happen. And that is the Millennium's Rule series by Trudy Canavan. Maker's Curse is the last book, and that's what I started to say. Again, this is another chunky book. I have to find the actual end of the book. This one is 538 pages. Not as long as Olympian Affair, but this is an adult fantasy series, and I've loved all 3 other books in this series. And I'm pretty sure I read 2 of them last year, so why I didn't get to this one this year, I don't know. Apparently I have issues with completing series. The next one is also the last book in a series, and that is The Storm of Echoes by Christelle Dabeau. Sorry, the book is called The Storm of Echoes. The series is called the Mere Visitor series. And this is also originally translated from French, but it is 536 pages. So it doesn't look as big as the other 2 books, but it's still about the same size. And this is a YA fantasy series. Right. The next series, the second book is coming out in, I believe, January. So I don't own it yet, but the series is Women of the Way by Heather Kaufman. And this is the first book up from dust. The second book is called Before the King. And this is an adult biblical fiction series. I have no idea how many books are going to be out in this series. I only know the second book's coming out in January. So then the next one I need to complete is The Giver Quartet by Lois Lowry. I only own the second book. I don't own the first or third, but I've read the first 3 books. The only one I have left is the 4th book called Sun. And I read the second and third books this year. I was hoping to get to the 4th one, but wasn't able to work it in. So would really like to get to it next year. And this is a middle grade sci-fi, very futuristic series. All right, then the next one I don't own, but that is The Themis Files by Sylvain Novelle. This is an adult sci-fi series, and the only book I have left is Only Human, which is the 3rd book in the trilogy. And I think part of the reason I haven't finished this one is because I've heard most people didn't care for the last book in the series, so I'm kind of worried that I won't as well. But I just need to read it and find out. The next one I need to complete is Lightfall by Tim Probert. This is a graphic novel series. It's a middle grade fantasy. And I do own the 3rd book, but I currently have it loaned out to someone else. Otherwise, I probably would have finished it this year. However, I am also going to go back and reread the first 2 books in the series before I read the 3rd one, because I feel like there's a lot of things that I've forgotten since I read those 2 books. But I do want to get this series finished out, and since it's a graphic novel, it should be pretty quick and easy to get through. The next one is also a series to get caught up on, and the 2nd book is coming out in 2025. It was originally slated for January, and now I think it's listed as April. So I guess we'll see. But that is the Vera Wong series by Jesse Q. Sutanto. The 2nd book is Vera Wong's Guide to Snooping on a Dead Man. And I really enjoyed this first book. So definitely want to get to the 2nd book next year and be caught up on this series. Also, this is an adult mystery series. I'm struggling to remember to say that. The next one is also a series I need to complete, and why I'm not done with this, I don't know, because the books are very short. But The Night Trilogy by Elie Wiesel. The 3rd book is Day. I read the first 2 books. They were very hard-hitting, but they were very good, well-told stories as well. And that's probably part of it, is I know Day is going to be a hard-hitting story, but I still want to finish it. The books are all barely over 100 pages. I should have had this done by now, and I don't really know what to classify this as. It's mostly literary fiction, although I feel like Day possibly has a little more, I don't know if magical realism or sci-fi is the better way to put it, because if I understand correctly, a man gets hit by a car, and then while he's unconscious, I don't know if he like sees things from back in time or what it is, but something happens while he's unconscious. That's all I really know. So I'm not sure how to classify this, but it is a classic. All right, then the next series that I would like to finish is the Passage Trilogy by Justin Cronin. I read the first 2 books years ago, really enjoyed the series, but was kind of hitting a point where I'm like, do I want to finish the series? Do I not? Do I want to keep reading his books? Do I not? And at this point, I feel like I would just really like to have this series finished. So I would like to get to City of Mirrors next year. And this is an adult sci-fi series, basically apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, starts apocalyptic in the first book, becomes post-apocalyptic as the book goes on. And the first 2 books were really well done, so I'd really like to get this series finished. And then I only have one other series that has 1 book left in it. But in order for me to get to this book, there are other books that I need to read. So I don't think I'm going to get this one finished next year, but I will at least go ahead and list it, and that is The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson. The main reason I don't think I'm going to finish this is because I've understood if you want to get all of the Easter eggs and get everything out of this book that you can, and considering I'm reading through the Cosmere books, I would like to do that, you need to read Rhythm of War, which is the 4th Stormlight book, before you read this one. At this point in time, I have read the first 2 books in the Stormlight Archives. And that's it. Okay, I've read the first 2 books and the novella that takes place between books 2 and 3. So, that would mean having to read both Oathbringer and Rhythm of War next year, and Dawn Shard, which is the novella that takes place between the 2. And then I can get to this one. However, Oathbringer and Rhythm of War are both over 1,000 pages. I don't know for sure that I'm going to be able to get to both, because it took me long enough to get through Words of Radiance this year. So this is a possibility, but if I get to the end of the year and this is the only one I have left that I still haven't finished, I'm okay with that. All right. Then aside from finishing series that have 1 book left, I do want to focus on making some steady progress on 4 to 5 series that I've started prior to this year. So the ones I'm going to mention are the ones I have in mind right now, but that might change by the time I get to the end of the year. So for the most part, if I get to the end of 2025 and I've read 2 or 3 books in 4 or 5 different series, I will still be okay with it even if it's not these specific ones, but I at least want to mention the ones that I currently have in mind. And the first one is the Spellslinger series by Sebastian de Castell. This is the 2nd book called Shadow Black. If I remember correctly, I own 5 of the 6 books in the series. And I guess I didn't specify it. This is a YA fantasy series. Then the next one is the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik. I've read the first 3 books in the series. This is the 4th book called Empire of Ivory. And this is an adult historical fantasy series. It's set during the Napoleonic Wars, except there are dragons. I read the first book towards the end of 2023, and then the 2nd and 3rd books in 2024. So I'd like to keep going with this series. These are slower paced books, so if I only get through 2 this year, I'm okay with that. But at the same time, I'd like to get through at least 3, because then I would only have 3 left in the series, and hopefully I could get through those in 2026. Then the next one I also don't own, but that is the Murderbot Diaries series. This one is by Martha Wells, and it's an adult sci-fi series, which I think most people are probably familiar with because the first book especially, All Systems Red, was really popular on BookTube when it first came out. But I have read, oh gosh, I have to think now. If I'm counting right, I believe I have read the first 4 novellas, the short story that takes place before the first book, and the short story that takes place between the 4th and 5th books. I believe that's what I've read. So the 5th book in the series is the first novel in the series. And that's the next one that I need to read. Then books 6 and 7. I don't think there's a book 8 yet. I don't know if there's going to be. But those are both novellas as well. I have no idea how long the series is going to be. But if I could get through the novel and the other 2 novellas, then at least I would be caught up on the series. Unless she releases another book in 2025. And then the last one that I know for sure I want to focus on next year is the Book of Ember series by Jean Duprow. This is the second book called The People of Sparks. The first book is The City of Ember, which is the one most people are familiar with. I reread The City of Ember, I think in 2023. And I really enjoyed it, but just still haven't finished the series. I do own the rest of the books. I just haven't picked them up and read them. So I would like to at least work on this series, if not finish it next year. And this is a middle grade sci-fi series. So the last ones I'm going to talk about as far as series are ones that either have a lot of bigger books in the series, or it's just a series that's not quite as high of a priority right now. So I'm only worried about getting to at least one more book in the series by the end of 2025. And if I get through at least one book in the series, I will be happy. So the first one falls under the big books in a series, and that is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. At this point, I think I own books 1 through 8, and then 10 and 11. Because I got a bunch of them on Book Outlet, but they didn't have book 9. So I've read the first 3 books, and this is book number 4 called The Shadow Rising, which, if I'm remembering correctly, is tied for the biggest book as far as the ones that I currently own. And yes, tied. There are 2 books that have the exact same page count, somehow. But just to give you an idea, okay, I don't need the glossary though. This book is 917 pages. So, it's a chunky book. And as much as I would like to say I want to get through 2 books in this series this year because they're so big and just make that much more progress, I will be happy if I read 1. So, that's why it's on the list here. And if you aren't familiar with this one, this is an adult high epic fantasy series. Then the next one is also part of a series that has bigger books in it, and you could probably guess what it is because I kind of referenced it earlier, but that is the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson, which I need to get to. Oathbringer, which we all know is over 1,000 pages. That is the main book I want to get to in that series. If I can get to Dawn Shard, which, as I said, takes place between Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, that would be great. But the main thing is I want to get through Oathbringer. And I'll go ahead and let you know why I'm thinking I'm not going to get through both Oathbringer and Rhythm of War in 2025. Because aside from wanting to work on Oathbringer, this is a little bit of my Brandon Sanderson plans, just so you're aware. I'm also wanting to read Elantris, which is the first novel he ever published. And I want to get to this one because I also want to get to Tress of the Emerald Sea. And yes, mine is still in the plastic because I'm not taking it out of the plastic until I read it. I did not get to this when it first came out because I heard, again, if you want to get all the Easter eggs, basically, you need to read Elantris before you read Tress. My brother is really wanting me to read Tress. I really want to read Tress. So Elantris and Tress are both on my list of Sanderson books to get to next year. And yeah, that looks like a massive difference in size. But I also want to work on some of Arcanum Unbounded. I know there are some stories I can read because of what I've read in the Mistborn series, and I have read a few of them, but I haven't read all of them. Like, I think The Secret History is the main one that I haven't read. But I think there's also some that I can read based on what I've read in the Stormlight Archives. So I want to try to get some of Arcanum Unbounded read next year as well. And honestly, I just don't think between Oathbringer, Elantris, Tress, part of Arcanum Unbounded, and possibly Dawn Shard, I don't think I'm going to get to Rhythm of War. So that's why I'm saying I probably won't get to the Lost Metal. And if it's the only series I don't have done that had 1 book left, I'm okay with that. If I make progress on all these other Sanderson books that I'm wanting to read, I'm okay with that. All right, so the last one that is part of a series with bigger books in it, that I'd like to read at least one next year, is The D'Artagnan Romances by Alexandre Dumas. The first book is The Three Musketeers, which is the one that most people know. But this is the Viscount of Bragelonne. I'm not trying to do that in a French accent again. And this is the 3rd book in the D'Artagnan Romances. This one is... I don't want the explanatory notes or a list of historical characters. I just want the end of the book. This one is 658 pages. It doesn't necessarily look it, but it is a chunky book. If I could read more books in this series, that would be great. because there are only 2 more books after this one. But as long as I at least get this one read, I will be happy with that. All right, the last 2 are series that are just not quite as high of a priority, but I would at least like to get 1 book read in each of them. And the first one is the Coulter Shaw series by Jeffrey Deaver. This is The Goodbye Man, which is the second book. I read the first book, The Never Game, earlier this year, but the whole reason I read The Never Game was to read this one, because if I understand correctly, somehow this book has to do with a cult. Like there's something that he's investigating where a cult ends up getting involved, or he has to do research into a cult or something like that. So I've been really interested to get to this book, but I wanted to read the first book before I got to this one. Now, I will decide after I read this book if I want to continue the series or if I'm good with what I got from this one. But I at least want to get to this one next year. And no, I don't own that book. I'm borrowing it. And of course the battery died because I'm always long-winded. But the last series that I'm going to work on is probably going to seem silly that I list this as I only want to read 1 book because of how small this book is. But it's mostly because I've been putting this off, and if I read at least 1 book, I will be content with that. But that is the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. This is the second book called Piralandra. There's only 3 books in the series. Why don't I want to finish this series? Because I'll be happy if I finish 1 book. It is very short. So that's why I said it does feel kind of silly that it's on the list of not I want to finish this series, but I want to work on it. It's 190 pages. But this is a classic sci-fi series, and I really enjoyed Out of the Silent Planet. But, like I said, I kind of want to slow down my reading a bit, and these are books that have a lot to them. At least the first book did. So I want to make sure I'm taking the time to really take in what he's discussing in the book, but also just knowing how long I've put this book off. I will just be happy if I get through the 1 book. All right, then aside from the series, there are a few other books that I would really like to get to this year. These are books that are falling under the category of what I call TBR Vets. So books that have been on my TBR for a while. And 3 of the books on this list I have had for at least 5 years, if not more than 5 years, on my TBR. The first 2 are ones that I own. And in general, I haven't been upset that I've owned these books for so long and haven't read them. But it's reached a point where I'm like, okay, they're the only 2 left. I need to get to them. And those are 5 Little Pigs by Agatha Christie and also Black Coffee. Now, this is the novelization because if I understand correctly, Black Coffee was originally published as a play. But in the 90s, it was made into a novel, and that's the version I have. Now, these 2 books originally belonged to my grandma. I think all but 1 Agatha Christie book I own was originally my grandma's. Now, if you really want to get technical, we got these books from her in 2006. No, sorry, 2003. She was getting ready to move out of her house into an apartment, and so she was downsizing and getting rid of a lot of her books. So while my family was visiting, she let us take whatever books were of interest to us, and then of whatever was left, she would decide what she wanted to take with her and what she wanted to get rid of. And so we took some of the Agatha Christie books that she had. However, it wasn't until 2011 that the books were unpacked and distributed between my brother and I as far as all the different books that we had chosen. And these then came to my house and were put on my shelves. So I consider that I have owned these books since 2011. Now, the reason why I hadn't been in a hurry is because there were several Agatha Christie novels that I owned. And I got to a point where I realized, okay, I own these books. I need to get to them. But I was content if I read 2, maybe 3 a year. But now I'm at the point where these are the only 2 left. And I didn't get to them this year. I did get to 1 other book that I owned that I hadn't read in 2024, and that was Cat Among Pigeons. But these 2 are the only ones left. So I really need to get through these and just have all of the Agatha Christie done. And I don't know much about these. I know this is a Hercule Poirot because it says it right on the cover. I almost want to say 5 Little Pigs is Hercule Poirot, but I don't remember. Yes, Hercule Poirot is literally the first 2 words in the book. So yes, these are both Hercule Poirot novels. Beyond that, I don't know. But these are the first 2 that I do want to make sure I get to this year because I've owned them for so long. And then there's only 1 other book that I have had on my TBR saved somewhere for at least 5 years. And that is Finnegan of the Rock by Melinda Marchetta. This one I added, it's either my Libby or Hoopla app. I don't remember which now. I think it's Libby. In 2019. So 5 years ago. And I started the book at one point. I think I got about a quarter or a third of the way through it. And I don't remember why I put it down. I probably just got busy with other books and put it off long enough that I realized if I was going to pick it up and read it, I would have to start over. So I just didn't. But at this point, I need to either read this book or I need to take it off of my list. So that is going to be the plan with this one. I've heard good things about it, but I haven't gotten to it. It is a YA fantasy. That's all I really remember. But yeah, one way or another, it needs to go. All right, and then the last of the TBR Vets are the nonfiction that I have had on a list somewhere for 3 or more years. I don't have any nonfiction that are more than 5 years, but all of the ones I have on my list, I have had saved in my Hoopla or Libby app since either 2020 or 2021. So it's been 3 or 4 years that they have been on those TBR lists, and I haven't gotten to them. There's only 5 of them. And again, I'm going to go with if I don't get to these by the end of this year, then they're just coming off the list. Because if they've been on there that long, and I haven't gotten to them, and I make it a priority and I don't get to them, then I'm probably not going to. So the 5 books on the list are Another Gospel by Elisa Childers, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Norman L. Geisler and Frank Turek, Gay Girl Good God by Jackie Hill Perry, Seeking Allah Finding Jesus by Nabil Qureshi, I think is how you say his name, and Shattered Dreams by Irene Spencer. Possibly aside from Shattered Dreams, they're all Christian nonfiction, and I still haven't read them. Shattered Dreams is about Irene Spencer's time in a cult, and I think, I'd have to go look it up and see, but I think in her case, because I've read a couple of their books by people who were in cults and got out of them. But in those cases, they were children born into the cult. I believe Irene Spencer was married to one of the cult leaders in whichever cult she was a part of, and then eventually got out. I don't remember for sure. She may have been born into it and then married one of the leaders. I don't remember for sure. But I do know that she was in a cult for a while and eventually got out. That's all I really know about the book. But these are books that I've wanted to get to for a while, and I've clearly just been putting them off. So I want to make them a priority next year. Now, last year in my reading goals video, actually I guess I did it in a separate video, I also went over my Bible reading plans for the year. However, for 2025, I'm just going to talk about my Bible reading plans in my monthly TBRs. Because honestly, sometimes plans change. I have an idea in my head where I'm like, this is what I want to work on, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the year something comes up and I'm like, actually I want to start working on this. Or I start working on that and then kind of hit burnout and need to switch gears. Or I fall behind, or whatever the case may be. So I'm just going to talk about it on a month-by-month basis. Kind of talk about, okay, this is where I left off last month. This is what I'm going to be working on this month. So I'm not going to have anything in this video as far as my Bible reading plans for next year. We'll just cover that monthly. The only other goal I have for this year, and I can't go into anything specific because that video isn't out yet, but I am doing a list of 40 books I want to read by the time I'm 40. It will be out later this month. It's just not out yet. But I would like, if possible, to get through half of the books on that list by the end of 2025. And in case you're wondering, why do I want to get through half of the books in 2025? It's because I only have 2 years to get through the list. Because yes, my birthday is coming up, and that's when I'm going to be posting the video. So, or very close to my birthday is when the video is coming out. So I basically have 2 years to get through this list. So I need to get through about half of them in 2025. But that video, I believe, will be out a week from this one. So you can keep your eye out for that. And yeah, we'll see if I get through 20 of them next year or not, because that's a third of my reading for next year if I do. I think that's all I have for goals for next year, and I hope so, because my throat is getting dry and this video is going to be really long. I thought this was going to be a short video, and it is not. Let me know down in the comments below what are some of your goals for 2025, And other than that, I hope you are having a wonderful Christmas season, and I'll see you later.